Hello everyone and welcome back to Learn Arabic. We are still pursuing our path towards mastering the most unique and challenging Arabic letters and sounds, and as indicated on the title of this lesson, time has come for the letters Ain, Ghain and Kha. Since we have a lot of ground to cover, let's delve in, shall we? Our first stop is the letter Ain, and since we have already practiced the letter Ha in our previous lesson, I'm glad to inform you that half of the work is done. The reason why? The two letters Ha and Ain are housemates. In other words, they do share the same point of articulation, and what makes these two letters sound that different is their attributes. Right, this is the articulation point of the letter Ain, also known as al-makhraj, and Ain is also pronounced by the movement of the epiglottis towards the back wall of the throat. However, unlike the letter Ha, the epiglottis will move all the way back towards the back wall of the throat until it almost blocks it. As I said, almost. It is by no means a complete closure. You really have to narrow the surface of the throat, otherwise you won't get the authentic sound of the letter Ain. I'm going to sound out the letter Ain in its state of sukoon in order to make it easier for you to put into practice all of these instructions just mentioned. Listen up, please. Ah. Ah. Again. Ah. Ah. Okay, just in case some of you are still struggling with this makhraj, let's spare a couple of minutes to skim through last week's lesson. So, as previously mentioned, in order to locate your epiglottis, please close your mouth and swallow. You will feel that something moves up and down, and that is your larynx. You will also be able to detect that something is pulling back, and that is your epiglottis. While swallowing, the epiglottis moves backwards in order to block saliva from entering into the larynx and into the trachea through the respiratory tract. And this movement is very similar to what happens while pronouncing the letters Ain and Ha. So please try to swallow a couple of times in order to be able to trace, or let's say to track down the movement of the epiglottis. Take your time and feel free to pause if need be. Now, after understanding the movement of the epiglottis towards the back wall of the throat, try to copy after me, please. Ah. 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 And the first thing to notice is that the sound of the letter Ain as-sakinah is neither allowed to continue nor suddenly stopped. So there is a moderation in the length of the sound, and this is true when the letter is sakinah. Also, kindly note that there is a stoppage of breath, which means that the air doesn't flow while pronouncing the letter Ain. And the easiest way to check that is to put your hand right in front of your mouth while saying the letter Ah. Ah. I know that this might sound trivial, but actually it is a decisive factor. The reason why: these attributes or sifat come in handy when the letters share the same point of articulation, just like Ha and Ain do. So again, unlike the letter Ha, there is no continuation of breath while pronouncing the letter Ain. The tongue has nothing to do with the pronunciation here. It will remain at the bottom of the mouth. Make sure to also lower the back of your tongue because Ain is a light letter. Now, in order to deepen our understanding and increase familiarity with the letter Ain, let's go over some examples. Starting with the state of sukoon, and at this stage we all know that the attributes of the letter are going to be more striking compared to the short vowels. From right to left, رعد, وعد, صعب. I'm going to repeat each word separately this time in order to give you enough time to copy after me. رعد, وعد, صعب. Make sure to go to the correct point of articulation. We are moving the epiglottis, which is located at the middle of the throat. Right. So when we say, for example, وعد, the sound of the letter عين doesn't flow and it is not suddenly interrupted either. Try to find the middle ground. I cannot stress enough the fact that you should never ever lop off the sound. Allow it to continue until it stops on its own. That's on one hand. On the other hand, there is no continuation of breath and the tongue remains away from the top of the mouth, not to mention that the back of the tongue don't rise as well. I know that I keep insisting on the position of the tongue, and you might find this meaningless, but as we move on to the letter غين in a couple of minutes, you will realize the pivotal role of the tongue in pronouncing the Arabic letters. Right. Now, as we move on to the short vowels فتحة, كسرة, and ضمة, all of these attributes just mentioned won't be as remarkable. I will read all the examples at one go before moving on to the next letter. علم, ملعقة, عنب, عيادة, عصفور, علبة. Again. علم, ملعقة, عنب, عيادة, عصفور, علبة. That's it for the letter عين. Next on the list is the letter غين. Just like the letter عين, you really have to train yourself in order to learn how to pronounce the letter غين. And even though this letter don't exist in English, its sound is more familiar than you think, since it's very similar to gargling. Listen up, please. Ow. Ow. I'm going to intentionally stretch the sound. Ow. 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 Sounds like gargling, isn't it? I know that not all of you do gargle, but I'm quite sure you have seen someone doing it at least once. Hopefully. Let's get back to the matter at hand, and I really need your full attention, please. This is the makhraj of the letter غين, and the first thing I would like to draw your attention to is that since the beginning of this series, we have started at the bottom of the throat and worked our way up. Hence, as you can see, the position we are pointing at is slightly higher than the articulation point of the letter عين. Accordingly, we are no longer in the middle of the throat, but we have moved it to its top. So, as a deduction, we will say that the letter غين comes from the top of the throat. That's on one hand. On the other hand, if you pay close attention, you will also notice that the position of the back of the tongue is slightly different in this picture. The reason why: the letter غين emerges by the movement of the furthest back of the tongue towards the soft palate, which is located right on top of the uvula, which means that the back of the tongue has to rise in order to pronounce the letter غين. So again, the letter غين is pronounced from the top of the throat. More precisely, the furthest back of the tongue has to move backwards as if it is reaching to the soft palate. Please make sure not to get that far from the uvula, otherwise we will invade the letter Kha territory, as I will explain in a couple of minutes. We really need to make sure that these two neighbors don't cross the border and stay in good terms. Listen carefully, please. Owl. And while keeping an eye on the picture, try to imitate my pronunciation. Owl. Owl. A crucial hint: don't let your tongue go all the way back and close the makhraj. Even though the back of your tongue has to rise while moving back towards the soft palate, it should not touch it. The reason why: if we block the makhraj, we will prevent the sound from flowing, and this is the last thing we want to do, since it has to be a continuation of sound while pronouncing the letter غين. Owl. Owl. Kindly note that there is no continuation of breath. Owl. Owl. Right. There is still another attribute, i.e. صفة, of the letter غين, but I will push it back on purpose until we move on to the short vowels. For the time being, let's practice. Starting with the state of سكون, and reading from right to left should be as a second nature at this stage. مغفرة, مغرم, مغفرة, مغرم. First of all, please note that the letter غين الساكنة has a thick sound. مغ, مغ. Secondly, make sure that this heaviness is only due to the rise of the back of your tongue. That is to say, don't allow your lips to get involved. I know that they do love to take a circular shape in this kind of situation, but try to tame them. مغفرة, مغرم. Now, let's move on to the short vowels, and this is the right time to explain the last attribute of the letter غين, known as تفخيم. Since we are off the beaten track, I would really appreciate if you pay extra attention. Any letter that requires an elevation of the posterior portion of the tongue falls under an attribute called تفخيم. And setting aside the definition written on this slide, which sound too technical, I would simply define تفخيم as a heaviness, or let's say a thickness in the sound of the letter. However, this thickness has to abide by certain rules, and perhaps the most fundamental two that every beginner should know are: number 1, never ever use your lips to achieve تفخيم, unless the letter itself is in conjunction with ضمة. That is to say, please let the back of your tongue do the job for you. And number 2, never ever exaggerate the تفخيم on a letter that is carrying a كسرة. What do I mean by this? Well, let's delve into these examples for a better understanding. غواصة, غراب, غزلة أو غزلان. غواصة, غراب, غزلة أو غزلان. On a side note, غزلة and غزلان are synonyms, so feel free to pick the one that suits you. Now, Let's focus on فتحة and ضمة. We will push back the letter غين المكسورة just a little bit. When I say غراب, غراب, the posterior portion of the tongue is elevated and it reaches to the soft palate without touching it. Make sure the tip of the tongue doesn't rise. And what happens here is that the sound of the letter is directed up towards the roof of the mouth, creating that thickness we are aiming for. غو, غو. Also note that your lips are rounded, or let's say have to be rounded, and that's completely normal since the letter غين is مضمومة, i.e. in conjunction with ضمة. However, this round shape is not allowed when pronouncing the letter with فتحة or كسرة, because this roundness belongs exclusively to ضمة. Therefore, when you say غواصة, غواصة, make sure that the heaviness of the sound is solely due to the rise of the back of your tongue, and don't allow your lips to take part in the pronunciation process. Right. If you didn't lose a thread, we still have to explain تفخيم with كسرة, and I'm going to do my best to simplify things. When I say غزلان, غزلان, there is no extra effort. Don't say غي, غزلان, غزلان. Think about it as if كسرة decreases or restrains the attribute of تفخيم. The reason why? There are 5 levels of تفخيم, and even though these levels should be taught at an advanced level, knowing that a مفخم letter that is in conjunction with a كسرة is at the lowest level of تفخيم will do no harm. Quite the opposite, it will help you improve your pronunciation. So again, please don't exaggerate while pronouncing the letter غين with كسرة. غي, غي, غي. The attribute of تفخيم is definitely still there, but it is at its lowest level. That's it for the letter غين. Let's finish this lesson with the letter خاء. And the good news is that the letter خاء also emerges by the movement of the furthest back of the tongue towards the soft palate. And just like the previous example, the back of the tongue will not touch the soft palate. It will only get closer. And the question is, what makes this day and night difference between these two letters? Shall we see? First of all, let's do a side-by-side comparison between the makharij. And the first thing to note is that even though these two letters are pronounced by the movement of the furthest back of the tongue towards the soft palate, the letter kha sits slightly above the letter ghain. So again, the position of the letter kha is slightly higher than the letter ghain. Moving on, now listen carefully please. أخ, أخ. Before enumerating the attributes of the letter kha, I would love to insist on respecting the gap between the back of the tongue and the soft palate. The reason why, if we put too much pressure as if we are trying to close the point of articulation, the letter kha will sound like snoring, and this is the last thing we want to do. In the light of this important detail, let's pronounce the letter kha as-sakina. أخ, أخ. Please also make sure that there is a continuation of breath as well as a continuation of sound. أخ, أخ. The mouth remains open and the tip of the tongue remains down while its back rises to reach to the soft palate without touching it. Don't forget to go higher than the letter غين. Also be careful of the position of your lips. They should not intervene in the تفخيم process. Right. It's high time to wrap up today's lesson with a couple of examples, starting with خاء in its state of rest, also known as سكون, and the words are مخرج نخلة. Again, مخرج نخلة. Let's move on to the short vowels. Again, the attributes of the letter won't be as preponderant. خيمة, خبز, خيار. خيمة, خبز, خيار. A couple of notes before ending. Make sure that the heaviness of the letter خاء المفتوحة is solely due to the rise of the back of your tongue, and don't allow your lips to take part in the pronunciation process. خيمة, خيمة. However, you will need to round your lips while pronouncing the letter خاء with ضمة. خبز, خبز. And this has nothing to do with the thickness of the sound. In fact, this circular shape is related to the pronunciation of ضمة. Any letter should be accompanied by a circling and protrusion of the lips when it is in conjunction with the ضمة. Last but not least, considering that a مفخم letter that is in conjunction with the كسرة should be at the lowest level of تفخيم, make sure to pronounce خيار with no extra effort. That's it. Well done, everyone. We still have one lesson to go in this series, so stay tuned. شكرا على حسن استماعكم ومع السلامة.